Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the debut record from All for Metal, Legends, out July 7th on AFM Records. This album has 11 tracks, 38 minutes in length, and they are an international heavy metal band. Now I find it really interesting that the name of the record is Legends, considering that this album feels like a greatest hits, the most legendary songs of All for Metal. That's how it comes across, more so than a debut album. Normally I'm not a fan of records with this kind of experience, more so when it's a debut record. I look for more of a concise and cohesive experience where the whole record has a solid path, a solid journey for the listener. But this album, I'm willing to turn a blind eye to it. The quality of the individual songs is such, the versatility of the songs, both musically and vocally, is such, that it doesn't matter if the tracks are slightly disconnected from one another, because you can easily re-engage with every single song at every single turn. The playability of this album is phenomenal. Now, the one thing that you could say that perhaps could be a negative, at least for those familiar with the band coming in, is that they released a lot of these songs, they released a lot of these singles, so there's not a lot new material in the album for a listener to digest. If you haven't heard those songs, if you haven't heard those singles, and everything is fresh and new, then you don't have a problem. You're going to enjoy this record from start to end. But for those that are familiar with the band, coming into this record, there's not a lot of new ideas, there's not a lot of new tracks for you to discover. You're just really going in, knowing what to expect, and then enjoying those tracks and that flow from beginning to end and getting the most out of this record. So it's a design that works perhaps better for some than for others, but the quality of the individual songs, that is completely undeniable. As far as sound is concerned, this is an interesting record because it has a lot of old school classic heavy metal elements in the sound and in the production, but it also has some more modern elements as well in both sound and production. So it's an album that is not modern, but it's not old school either. It walks a fine line between the two, perhaps taking the best that those two genres currently offer. When you look at old school, you see more of a guitar-driven and vocally based style tracks with great production behind it that enhances those two main elements. And when you're looking at more modern, you're looking at some add-ons to the sound, specifically some electronic elements that emphasize the atmosphere of the tracks, and you're also going to see some of that, very little of that, but some of that, and some of the songs that push into a more modern feel, never really crossing the line into that over-synthesized sound. This album is definitely not that. This album is a bare-bones heavy metal record, but there's definitely some slight nuances that are more modern than old. So it's an interesting record from this point of view because it merges these two worlds and it does a wonderful job doing that, and that gives a lot of quality and it offers somewhat of diversity as far as the sonic perspective is concerned, giving a lot more of a rich texture to the tracks, giving a lot more depth to the tracks, giving a lot more substance to these songs. Now, both styles obviously depend a lot on the guitar sound and on the guitar experience, and this album is just that, an album that depends heavily on how the guitars move you forward, on how they impact the overall thickness and volume of the tracks, but also on the more melodic side and the quality of the solos. This record has quality guitar work across all the different elements, in the leads, in the melodies, and the solos, in the chunky riffs. Everything surrounding the guitar work on this album is top notch, regardless if it pulls in more of an old school vibe or a modern vibe. The guitars are always there to lead the way, to lead the pack, and be one of the forceful elements on this record. I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a guitar-centric album, because I think this is a more vocally centric record, but the guitars definitely play an important role in the journey and in the overall sound experience that this album offers. The other two elements that I think are really important on this record is drums and bass. The bass really surprised me. I was expecting the bass to be a little bit more hidden. I was expecting the bass to not have the impact that it has, but oh my god, the bass really pops on this record, and I felt that a lot of the texture of these songs, a lot of the width of these songs was really caused by the bass and how much it came through in the mix. It comes through in songs that are a little bit more melodic, more methodic, but also in those ones that are a little bit more driven. The bass has a clear impact in putting forward a much larger footprint for these songs, allowing the drums to then expand upon that footprint and giving them more volume, giving them more presence, not overpowering everything else around them. This is an album that pushes the drums and bass into a secondary role, but not less important in the overall perception of what the soundscape is all about, giving enough room for the guitars to shine, for the guitars to breathe, but still being there in order to give it a little bit of soul. The drums and bass definitely give a lot of soul to how this record comes across. A lot of the oomph that this album has comes from those two elements, sometimes in a very subtle way, but not less impactful at all. Now, vocally, super dynamic. I mean, you have two great vocalists, two very different vocalists, and I love the dynamics of this record. Some songs, you have duets. Some tracks, depending on the theme of the song and on the sound behind that theme, they go either with the vocalist that's more classic heavy metal, almost power metal to a certain degree, or they go with the one that gives you a little bit more harshness, that gives you a little bit more heaviness. Deciding which one to go with, depending on the topic, depending on the theme and on the sound, is perfect. Allows the album to be a lot more dynamic and allows the songs to have a lot more life. Using both together in duets increases the overall quality of the tracks as well, and makes the individual tracks within themselves be very dynamic as well. Then you also have choirs, backing vocals. There's a lot of vocal elements on this record that help this album feel alive. It's an album that's filled with hymns from start to end, and you cannot have those hymns without great vocal performances, some backing vocals, and some choirs in order to enhance that experience, which in a live setting is going to work extremely well. All around, the more that I listen to this album, the more that I realize that I haven't heard an album like this since Hail to England by Manowar. This album is up there with one of those early Manowar records. It has that same experience, it has that same vibe, and the old school elements and the old school production approach really brings that era of heavy metal into the forefront when you're listening to Legends. So for that, I honestly enjoy this record tremendously. It was such a fun album to listen to. For the fans of the genre, this is definitely going to be a home run. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Godess of War, the second track on the album. It's a great sounding song with a very impactful drum presence. The bass fills in the gaps extremely well, giving a little bit more of a backbone to how this song is coming across, making the track a lot more textured. It also allows the guitars to move between the front and the back of the drums. It's really interesting sound-wise. It feels like the drums and bass are together as one, as the middle layer, and then the guitars alternate between moving into the forefront, pushing the track forward, or moving behind the drums and allowing the drums to push the track forward. This makes the track come alive. It gives a lot more ebbs and flows within the song without having to change too much within the internal dynamics. The vocals are always up front. Pushing that vocal duo up front allows the track to have an immediate vocal impact, and like I said earlier, this is a very vocally driven record, and this song definitely points out that aspect of the album itself. The solo completes the track, making this a very impactful song from a soundscape point of view, but also from a vocal performance. Next you have Hear the Drum, a hymn, a drum hymn if you will. Vocally and musically, this song is on point. Both are pulling you in the exact same direction. The vocal choirs in the chorus really emphasize the style of the song. It emphasizes that hymn approach that the track has. The verses allow the drums to come into the forefront and have more of a direct impact in the song, in the theme of the song, pushing the guitars to a secondary role and allowing them to be the ones that drive the experience. It's definitely a track that's more vocally driven in the chorus, and then depending a lot more on the sound of the drums in the verses. But the two cooperate with one another in order to bring this song to life and to really hear the drum, so you can really hear the drum. I mean, it would make no sense to have a song like this where all you hear is bass and guitars. So it's a track that surrounds itself sound-wise around the theme that it holds. Last but definitely not least, Run. The song says it all. It's a song that runs away from you from the moment it starts. Talk about pushing it all the way to 11, not necessarily on volume and heaviness, but rather on the tempo. It's a great moving track. Vocally, very vibrant, very dynamic, very fluid musically. High energy track. It has a simple and catchy chorus. Overall, not overcomplicated. It's a very simple track all around, and it has a lot of power metal elements in the sound and in the overall vocal approach. This allows the track to feel more fluid, to feel more dynamic, and even more linear at times without completely falling flat. Super energetic, super catchy vocally, especially once again, once you get into that chorus. But it's a great fun track, a track that has a lot of movement, and it's a track that follows Hear the Drums. So it's a song that kind of changes the paradigm a little bit, and it moves from that more methodic experience to a faster, higher tempo. Great track all around. This is it, all for Metal Legends on July 7th on AFM Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.